This is part 3 of Overcoming Rejection. Well, Muhammad and his followers experienced a great deal of rejection. It was very painful. The question is, how did he respond? Because remember, Muhammad is the best example. So he sets a spiritual template for how a Muslim should respond to rejection. And that becomes a very profound set of values that influence the Islamic worldview and Islamic society. And when you share the gospel with Muslims, you're engaging with the Islamic response to rejection. I want to emphasize that individual family experiences of Muslims might not be like this, and people vary. Some families have more of this than others in any society, and so not all Muslims will be equally affected by this worldview. But when someone's leaving Islam, this is part of what they're rejecting, what they're turning away from. When they say, I no longer accept the best example of Muhammad, this is part of what they're rejecting. Well, Muhammad did show symptoms of self-doubt. He wondered whether he was demonized. He actually vocalized this. He wondered whether he was mad. He said, I'm going to go and throw myself off a cliff. He thought of killing himself. So it did cause him to doubt himself. In fact, it was the angel Gabriel, so tradition says, that spoke to him and said, no, you're not insane, you're not mad, this is real. And his wife, who was his first believer, Khadijah, she supported him and affirmed him as well. There was also the satanic verses episode. The pagan Meccans had been really rejecting what Muhammad said, and then, because they didn't like their gods being rejected. And then Muhammad said something about how the pagan goddesses were exalted cranes, or their intercession was valid. He made a comment that validated the pagan gods. In fact, some of his followers were absolutely shocked when he did this. This is the satanic verse. So this verse was in the Quran in the sense that it was said to come from God. But then he was informed by the angel Gabriel that Satan had led him astray. So he declared that these verses were satanic, and he renounced them. So he rejected them. There was for a moment there, the Meccans really liked his message and they began to get on board with him. But then when he rejected what he'd said, they fell away again, and they mocked him even more. Like, what kind of prophet are you that you're hearing from Satan? They were also accusing him of many things. They were accusing him of making things up, of lying, of being a faker. And he would justify himself. He'd say, you'll see which of us is the demented. You say I'm crazy, but you will find out later who's the one who's wrong. He began to validate himself. So he was accused of being a shepherd boy, the lowest kid in the family looking after the sheep. And he said, don't you know, all prophets have been shepherds. So the fact that I'm a shepherd proves that I am a really excellent person, a prophet. And they said, what kind of prophet are you? You've been led astray by Satan. He said, the angel Gabriel revealed to him, and it's recorded in the Quran, that all prophets have been led astray at some time by Satan. So it became a mark of honor that he'd been led astray by Satan. And the Quran, Allah speaks to him in the Quran and says, Muhammad, you have a tremendous nature. So his friends are saying, you're an idiot, you're crazy, you're demented, you're a liar, you're a faker. And he says, it's all right, God has told me I have an amazing character. I have a tremendous nature. So he tells his followers that. Allah says, I have an incredible character. In fact, he said he was the best man of the best tribe, the Qurait's a tribe, of the best nation, the Arabs. He said, I'm the choicest of the chosen. So they say, you're nothing, and he says, I'm the most superior person that has ever lived. And he was accused of illegitimacy because of his very long gestation in his mother's womb, which is more than the usual 9 months, one of the miracles of Muhammad, actually. He responded by saying that he'd never had a single illegitimate ancestor all the way back to Adam. Not a single one of his ancestors had been born out of wedlock. He also responded violently with words. So the people that opposed him, he said they were going to roast in hell. And while they're being roasted in hell, they'll be spoken to and they'll be told, this is Muhammad, who you said was a liar, and now look, you're suffering. Ha, 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 ha. It's kind of, you will see how wrong you are when you're suffering in hell. He has this image which he describes in Mecca. This is the so-called peaceful period, when he says that the believers will be in paradise and the unbelievers who've mocked him will be roasting in hell, and the believers in paradise will be looking into hell and they'll be laughing at the people who are being burnt up. So he said, you're laughing at me now, but the time will come when the believers will be laughing at you while you're being tortured. And towards the end of his time in Mecca, the Meccans came to him and said, you are actually trying to destroy us. You hate our religion. We know what you're up to. And he said, that's right, I bring you slaughter. Sometimes people say the Meccan period was peaceful, but actually he was a very troubled person and he was torturing them all in hell and trying to find someone to help him physically to bring that to the present as well. So he did not respond well to rejection, you might say. He also showed very extreme aspects of control in his relationship with his followers. He said, it's not for any believer, man or woman, when Allah and his messenger have decreed a matter, to have a choice in their affair. That is, if I have spoken and Allah has spoken, we sort of speak together, then there's no more discussion, end of story. Let me give you an example of the way he worked through some of his issues. This is a famous story. His foster son Zayd had a wife called Zainab. A foster son, when you foster a child in Arabic culture, that becomes just like your son. And he took a bit of an interest, a shine to Zainab, and Zayd realized this. And so Zayd divorced his wife so that his father could marry her. And now, that's against, if it was an actual son, that's against the laws of incest in Islam and in Arab society at the time. But Allah spoke to Muhammad and encouraged him to do this. And here is the passage in the Quran. When you said to him whom God has blessed and has favoured, keep your wife to yourself, then fear God, you were concealing within yourself what God would reveal, fearing other men. So this is God is speaking to Muhammad, and God says, when you said to Zainab, look, keep your wife, I'm not interested in her, you are actually fearing man. You're fearing what other people would say. So, Allah says, when Zayd had accomplished what he would of her, then we gave her in marriage to thee, to you, so that there should not be any fault in the believers, touching the wives of the adopted sons, when they've accomplished what they would of them, and God's commandment must be performed. So, what he's saying here is that Allah is saying that when Zayd had finished with Zainab and divorced her, and he didn't need her anymore, then Allah says, I gave her to you in marriage. And the reason why Allah in his mercy caused Muhammad to marry Zainab was that so the believers would know that it was all right to marry the wives of their adopted sons. It wasn't for Muhammad's sake, it was so that the believers would know what was correct. So here is Muhammad justifying himself, he's validating his desire to marry his son's wife by saying, well, I had been a man-fearer about this, but God has shown me that I need to be free of that fear, and this is for the believers so that they will know that it's okay. So this is quite a characteristic type of reasoning that Muhammad would go through about some of the issues that he faced. This is a very controlling way of dealing with your life. I'm doing this because God says I should do it. And it's interesting, his son, when he realized that Muhammad had an interest in Zainab, he was very quick to divorce his wife and get himself out of the way. Another example of control is the fostering of adult males through breastfeeding. This was an issue. Muhammad had taught that if you were not related to a woman, she had to be veiled in your presence. But if you're related, you're like an uncle or a brother, then she doesn't have to cover up. And this caused some problems because there might be someone living in a house and not related, and the woman found it a bit of a burden that she had to be covered up all the time. So someone like that went to Muhammad and said, what do we do about this? He's this man, he's in the house, and it's really a terrible nuisance. And so Muhammad said, what you need to do is breastfeed that man, and then you will have fostered him. He becomes your foster son. Then you don't have to be covered up anymore. And so that's what he actually did. And a few years ago, there was a sheikh at Al-Azhar University in Egypt who was advising this for people in the workplace, that as a way of making it easier to work together, the women should allow the men to have to breastfeed from them, and then they'd be foster children, and then it'd all be all right, and things would be righteous. Divorce and remarriage, another example. A couple was divorced and they came to Muhammad and they said, "Oh, we made a mistake, we want to marry again, I love her, she's mother of my children." And Muhammad said, actually, you can't mess around with this. You can only remarry if she marries another man first, consummates the marriage, and then is divorced by him. Because God doesn't like divorce, so you can't muck around like this. And so that's part of Sharia law, that if a couple divorce, maybe he's a bad day, he gets angry and says, "I divorce you 3 times," she can't remarry him until she's married someone else, it's been consummated, and then been divorced. So it's really tough for Muslim women, actually, if their husband has as I say, divorces them in a fit of rage, and they have to he has to find his best friend or someone who'll marry her and have sex with her and then get divorced. And Angel Gabriel showed him in a vision he should marry Aisha, who was the daughter of one of his best friends who was 6, and consummated that at 9. This young girl later was suspected of adultery. A man had to accompany her. She sort of missed out on being with the main group, and as a result of that, Muhammad introduced the requirement. He didn't accept the charge of adultery against her, and he introduced a requirement that there had to be 4 adult male witnesses of adultery in order for it to be proven in court. But again, it's like an arbitrary making up of this principle that actually is incredibly damaging for women today, because if they complain that they've been raped, they need 4 witnesses to justify that, and they can often be convicted of a crime if they don't have the adequate witnesses. So these are all examples. I'm not saying this in order to bag Muhammad, but they're all examples of very extremely controlling patterns of behaviour in managing his followers. He would humiliate them and make them go through terrible processes if they were sort of causing him any difficulties. So that arises from the rejection, I think. And actually, I think I'll stop at that point.